Hello and welcome to this alternative format edition of the Vininspo podcast. My guests this week are Philipp Wittmann from Weingut Wittmann in Westhofen in the Rheinhessen and Cornelius Dönnhoff of Weingut Dönnhoff in Oberhausen and Nahe. I caught up with Philipp and Cornelius during their recent visit to Melbourne to spend time in trade with their Australian importer CellarHand, whose kind support made this episode possible. This conversation is a must for anyone with the slightest interest in Riesling and German wine in general. These two are among the greatest white wine talents of their generation, with deep ancestral roots in their respective regions and a seemingly preternatural ability to read their vineyards and their fruit. As always, please refer to my extensive show notes for context on this conversation. Among other things, we spoke in detail about the climate and soils of their vineyards, villages and regions, understanding the land's specific talent for various tiers and styles of Riesling, their approach to the Burgundy grapes, the contemporary landscape of and global attitudes to German wine growing, the many faces of Rheinhessen, why the Nahe isn't more famous, getting by with a little help from your friends when frost bites, and why marrying a sweet Mosel winemaker is a recipe for a good night's sleep. I started by asking Cornelius what made Riesling worthy of a lifetime's devotion.
The thing is, we didn't choose Riesling to make it. You get born into a family, and then in that area where we're located, it just works. It was always there. And then it's not that we choose a variety and say, okay, we want to do this, we'll do that, because Riesling just works in our area. So it's just this kind of a mixture of terroir, climate, and tradition, I must say.
All right, why don't you dig into where you do it? As you say, you're born into the grape variety and your region. So we'll start with the Rheinhessen, Philipp. Could you give us an overview of that region? Obviously, it's one of the larger areas.
Yeah, it's the biggest wine growing area in Germany, so with more than 25,000 hectares of vineyards, and of course there is a big diversity in soil types, in climate conditions. There are sub-regions, so I can't say in general Rheinhessen is like that. I'm from the south of the region, and here we do have very traditional wineland based on limestone soils, and so our tradition is to produce dry wines, especially Riesling, but also the different Burgundy varieties are traditional there. And just climate-wise, perfect conditions, so we do have usually more dry seasons, so we do not struggle a lot with diseases in the viticulture, and it's not so hard to work in the vineyards as in these steep slopes far northern. And of course, if you see the whole region, you do have the famous village directly situated at the Rhine River, so Nackenheim and Nierstein, where Johannes Hasselbach is coming from, for example, and you are on red slate soils there. And if you have a view to the north, there are more sandy and loamy soils, and there is this village of Ingelheim where Pinot Noir is produced. And then the northwest is also very interesting, close to the Nahe Valley, where we go more and more to the volcanic soils, and it's a different climate conditions there, and it's also very interesting. So at the end in Rheinhessen, if you have a view on the map, it's from south to the river, to the east, to the north, and to the northwest. In the middle, maybe this is the part which is maybe less interesting.
Right, so at Nahe you mentioned, because you do have a border pretty much on Cornelius's territory there. The Nahe is a region that people don't tend to know so well I'm guessing in the UK as well, but here in Australia it's the one that people tend to ask questions about. How do you say it? Whereabouts is it? How do you classify the Nahe as a region?
So Nahe is different from Rheinhessen, obviously. So we are much smaller. It's only like 4% of the total wine production in Germany comes from the Nahe area. So we are just located south of the Mosel, north of Rheinhessen, and west of the Rheingau, so a little bit in that triangle, basically. And you can also split up the Nahe in 3 different parts, I must say. So the lower Nahe, basically from the Rhine, maybe to Bad Kreuznach, is more similar to Rheinhessen. It's more flatlands, not so cool nights, a little bit warmer during the day. Then the middle Nahe, where we are located, from Bad Kreuznach maybe until Schloss Böckelheim, is for me also the interesting part, because there's the biggest diversity of different soil types and vineyard sites. And then the upper part of Nahe, from Schloss Böckelheim river upwards towards like Monsing, it's a little bit cooler again, but also great sites, yeah. And then why it's not so well known, maybe because a lot of Nahe wines were sold under the name of Rhine wine, yeah, because we didn't have the name, and it was much easier to sell under the name of Rhine because it was well more known because of Rheingau and stuff like this. So that was a little bit a thing maybe until the beginning of the 70s, and then people started more and more and more and used the name Nahe on the label. Before that it was not necessary. There was always a Nahe wine growing region, but people didn't use the name basically to market it. And so that was also a reason why for example, we and other estates, we tried to push that name a little bit, to make it more important, because it is important. It is our region.
Yeah, and you're not far away from, neither of you, but Philipp probably a bit further from the Rheingau. Just across the river from Bingen, you have Rüdesheim. I know, again, in the Rheingau, there is diversity of soil, and it is a region that does have a bit of extension, especially from east to west. Do you see those wines from Rheingau as having a distinct personality, generally from Rheinhessen and Nahe?
Yeah, sure. I mean, every region is completely different. I mean, that is why we have different regions, because people in the past also realized those wines from here taste different or develop different or have a different ripening level than in other regions, basically. Yeah, completely. So Rheingau is, if you compare it to Nahe, it's a little bit, it's riper, it gets kind of warmer wines, but maybe a little bit less acidity than in our area.
Yeah. What about you, Philipp? How do you see the Rheingau wines?
Yeah, it's again interesting, because also Rheingau is diverse. If you go to the west, where Rüdesheim is based, I like this Rüdesheimer Berg because of its intense soil characteristics, its terroir-driven wines coming from. That's something completely different as the middle part of Rheingau, where you have more loamy soils, and maybe this is also the warmest part of the region. And then you have, on the east, you have Hochheim, where you have more clayish soils, more comparing to our soils in the south of Rheinhessen. So in general, yes, for sure, Rheingau is a region where it's cooler climate as in Rheinhessen, and you could feel this in the wines. And it's also a little bit, maybe the Rhine is a little bit the border for wine style characteristics. So, for example, in Rheinhessen, there are less fruity and sweet wines as produced in the Rheingau, also in the Nahe Valley. And this is because of the climate conditions. It just goes better in these more northern regions. You have more dancing acidity for these more fruity styles.
Okay, so dialing in a little bit closer then to where you are in Westhofen, tell us a little bit about that particular climate and soil when you're discussing your region overseas. What is it about Westhofen that gives you an advantage in grape growing?
So I personally feel that it's a big luck being born in Westhofen and being able to produce wines on these amazing vineyards, because climate-wise, it's quite good. So we are a little bit in the rain shadow of a big mountain western of us, and we do have fantastic soils. So these clayish topsoils preserve water quite well, especially in the dry summers. And the limestone in the underground, the big rocks in the underground, gives a lot of texture into the wine. So it's really the DNA of the wines from our topsides is always very much influenced by the chalky-driven aromatics, and so it's special wineland for me. And Westhofen is also not a small wine village. We grow 700 hectares of vineyards, so more than the complete Ahr Valley, for example. So this shows that there is enough way to choose where to produce. So, and we have 4 different single vineyard sites which are named as Grand Crus, and also these 4 different sites are quite diverse in their texture. And I just like it to produce wines which showing their origin in the best possible way.
Yeah, well, I'll talk a little bit more about specifically those sites a bit later. When it comes to climate and weather, is Rheinhessen fairly stable summer into autumn conditions compared to other regions in Germany?
I would say yes. It's really like this, that we are not situated directly on the Rhine River in Westhofen, so this means the fork is not our problem in a way. And as I told you, we do have these rain shadow situation through this mountain in the west. So it's kind of preserved for extreme situations through this. Of course, climate conditions are quite well in the way that it's not getting too cold in winter, and spring starts when it should. Usually we do have great summers, and if you see, for example, the plants in our garden, there's also a big diversity. We do have a lot of Mediterranean plants and also some tropical plants which survive in our climate.
Yeah, and over in the Nahe, you're not far away from Philipp, really, as the crow flies in distance, but different climatic influences there. You've obviously got the river Nahe flowing through. Again, in your specific spot, Oberhausen and the Nahe and around there, what is the climate like there, and what are its advantages? What are its risks?
Yeah, it's a little bit different because we have a lot of hills, mountains around, so we have bigger differences in climate, in daytime temperature, nighttime temperature has huge differences because the cool air from the surrounding mountains flows into the valley during the night. We have maybe a little bit less rain because most of the weather comes from from the west basically, and there's the Hunsrück. And when it rains in the Hunsrück, so that's that mountain range between the Mosel and the Nahe. So they get way more rain, and then when the clouds reach us, basically they're kind of empty, more or less. So we have our annual rainfall is around 450 milliliters. I think in Westhofen it's a little bit more.
It's
similar. Okay,
nearly similar. Yeah. Maybe also because of our special situation with a mountain in the west.
Yeah, so it's then one of the two very dry regions in Germany. But difference is a little bit maybe this big difference in daytime and nighttime temperature. Yeah, that happens because of the different hills and mountains surrounding the valley. And then what Philipp also said, we have this thing that makes it a little bit more tricky, that from June, July on, basically, we get like very foggy mornings, because of the river. In terms of growing wines, gets very tricky in some years especially.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about the climate conditions and how they feed into different wine styles that you make. I remember your father saying that there was a bit of a similarity in picking times between the Nahe and parts of the Saar, so relatively far south on the Mosel Valley, which is interesting because as well, as I say, not being very far from Philipp, that's a very different kind of style, isn't it? And the acidity is quite different. It's a little bit more of a light feel in the mouth and a more dancing acidity.
Yeah, Saar is kind of similar to us. First of all, a little bit from the history. Also, Saar is not so well known because they were also always a little bit in the shadow of the Mosel, kind of. And it's similar to us. We were in the shadow of the Rheingau or Rhine Valley. So, and also from climate conditions. To Philipp, it's like 45 kilometers, something like that. Very, very easy. To the Saar is a little bit further. But climate conditions from us to Philipp is not so similar, and it's more similar to the Saar, even that it's further away. That's quite interesting. That is also why the older generation, my father, my grandfather, they were also more communicating with the guys from Mosel, Saar and Ruhr in terms of how do you grow things, what are you doing in the vineyards, because climate conditions there were more similar to us, and we are very close in terms of like, as the crow flies, to Rheinhessen, but not so in terms of how we grow the wines. That is completely different. It changed over time with climate change and stuff like this. We are a little bit closer today, but in the past, it was more that communication to the northern wine growing regions, Mosel, Saar and Ruhr.
Yeah, Philipp mentioned the different grape varieties that are grown in Rheinhessen. From memory, in terms of the statistics on what proportion of the vineyard is planted to different varieties, I think Rheinhessen has maybe one of the smaller amounts of Riesling compared to its neighbours, because there's a larger proportion of other things. What's the breakdown in Nahe, roughly, of Riesling versus other varieties, and what are those other varieties?
To be honest, I can't really tell you, because Nahe is also a little bit, as I said, diverse. When you go into the lower part of the Nahe, so Bad Kreuznach towards Bingen, there's also, I think, similarities, what they grow in Rheinhessen, more Weissburgunder, Grauburgunder, those varieties. Also a lot of Pinot gets grown there, stuff like this. In the middle part of the Nahe, where we are located, where all those great Grand Cru vineyard sites are located, Riesling was always the dominant grape variety. In the past, we had in our area also a little bit like Müller-Thurgau, Cannes, stuff like this, because we had sites where we couldn't get Riesling to ripen fully, like in the 70s, 80s, beginning of the 90s. But today, I would also say in our area, middle part of the Nahe, it's mostly Riesling, followed maybe by Weissburgunder.
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about Weissburgunder and Grauburgunder. You sometimes refer to these as the Burgundy varieties, obviously with Pinot Noir as well. So Pinot Blanc, Weissburgunder, Pinot Gris, Grauburgunder.
And don't forget the Chardonnay, which is getting more and more exciting.
We'll talk about Chardonnay, don't worry. When people think about, obviously, Pinot Gris, it's got quite a few different personalities, I guess, around the world. There's Pinot Grigio, Alsatian Pinot Gris, and then the German Grauburgunder, which I'm sure goes through quite a lot of stylistic diversity. But a lot of you Riesling growers grow, I think, those varieties really well and distinctly from a lot of the French and certainly the Northern Italians. What do you see as the potential for Grauburgunder and Weissburgunder in Rheinhessen? What are its characteristics? What are the things you're playing with that grape variety?
In general, of course, these varieties also have a tradition in our region and have been grown for a long time. Grauburgunder, the Pinot Gris, is a variety which is a little bit earlier in vegetation development and gets through this a little bit more richness on the palate and gets also a little bit riper. And nowadays, you have to be careful not to get overripe and too intense. Pinot Gris, also in Rheinhessen, handle it seriously to get an elegant and well-bodied white wine from it, which is, of course, always a quite universal food wine. I think, for me, Pinot Gris is nothing extra special as a variety. To be honest, it's not my favorite variety because it's a little bit too rich on the palate for my personal taste. So therefore, I prefer the Pinot Blanc, which is much more elegant, a little bit more citric-driven in its aromatics, and closer to the idea of a Burgundian white wine for me. And so Pinot Blanc has a lot of possibilities also in cooler climate conditions. It's quite well adapted on cooler climate. And so you also get fantastic Pinot Blancs, for example, also from the Mosel Valley where it's cooler at the Nahe. At Cornelius Plates, he's playing the game with Pinot Blanc and Pinot Gris quite well, which is shown that these varieties are also great adapted on this climate conditions. So in general, Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris are maybe better adapted on cooler climate as the Chardonnay. But through climate change, we do see that Chardonnay is going on better and better. And I personally believe that this will be an interesting variety for the future. But I will promise you, we will stand on Riesling also in long terms. Riesling is the main thing we do, and it won't change.
Yeah, so with Chardonnay, I guess that's a learning curve, right? Lots of people love the grape variety. We drink it a lot. But from a growing point of view, where are you personally on your journey with Chardonnay in terms of how to grow it and how to feel its way through the winery and what style you're producing?
So first, very important, it's same with Pinot Noir. There are a lot of different plants, and the characteristics of the variety as a wine could be quite different because of the different plants and the different clones. So all the material which is selected in Germany is mainly focused on a way that it's a little bit higher in yields, a little bit higher in acidity, so maybe better for producing sparkling. If you would like to produce a great Chardonnay, you should use plant material from France, which is lower in yields, which is smaller bunches, and you get another ripeness level. And if you point out this and follow then the same ideas as you grow a Riesling, which is terroir driven, you will get it with Chardonnay. And in the old days, my personal feeling was that we struggle a little bit with the aromatics, because in the cooler vintage you still get some greener aromatics in Chardonnay, where you could feel in Pinot Blanc it's not existing anymore. The Pinot Blanc is going in the direction of more yellow fruit driven aromatics, when Chardonnay is still staying on the green side. So you need a little bit more sun, or you need a little bit more heat, and then the Chardonnay is coming into the ripe aroma profile.
And Cornelius, I remember you telling me that you made a Pinot Noir once, still wine, and never again. It wasn't a
quite famous one, I have heard.
You said it wasn't a great success. I don't know if you've had another crack at it, but at the time you said that it wasn't your thing. So what is it about Pinot Noir that doesn't work? But more importantly, what is it about Pinot Gris and Pinot Blanc that work well in the Nahe for you?
So Pinot Noir can work, but I'm not a red wine producer. First of all, I don't have all the equipment. Yeah, that starts already. I have a little bit of Pinot Noir, which we use for sparkling, but in certain years, where it was really hot, or when we missed sometimes also the picking date for sparkling. Yeah, I mean, that happened. So then you have your grapes out there, and the must weight is too high for sparkling. So what do you do with it? So then the only solution is Pinot Noir, so make a red wine from it. I did it 3 times, 03, 04, and 11. But it's not what I want to do and not what I can. Other people can do that way better than I do. Yeah, so I leave it to them. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't work in the Nahe region, I must say. Pinot Blanc and Pinot Gris, totally different. I mean, they have history in our area. In the past, you have to think about like this, that in the 80s, sometimes acidity with Riesling was so high, even with de-acidification, you couldn't handle it. So you needed other grape varieties with lower natural acidity to blend into the Riesling to make it approachable. So this is also why we had like Müller-Thurgau and those like neutral type of grape varieties that got blended in the Riesling in some years to make it more drinkable. So it has a lot of history. You mentioned Pinot Gris from France or from Italy. That is not what we're trying to do. What we try to do is like Pinot Gris from Germany, from the Nahe. So it means a little bit more acidity in there, yeah, a little bit more fresh. We're not looking for like very heavy wines there. It's similar to our Rieslings. We want them elegant, but at the same time show the flavor of the grape variety. It's a different approach. I kind of like it, but it's not, those 2 grape varieties are not perfect to transporting terroir, I must say. It's more like a regional thing. It doesn't really matter if I grow it on slate or volcanic soils in our area. There's not so much of a difference. Right. Yeah. So it's Pinot Gris from the Nahe. That is different than from like Pinot Gris from Rheinhessen or something.
Yeah, right. And it seems to get a bit more spice in Grauburgunder with acidity, as opposed to either going to the Alsatian spice versus the Pinot Grigio neutral. You seem to be somewhere in the middle there in terms of having that higher acidity with a bit of spice interest.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
probably the climate. So Philipp, dialing in on your estate a little bit more, Westhofen, you also grow in Nierstein. You mentioned those soils being a bit different where Johannes Hasselbach is in Nackenheim and Nierstein. Just tell us a little bit, if you will, about the practicalities of growing grapes in those two different regions. You've talked about limestone, and I've heard you mention the quote-unquote textures of limestone. So what is it about the limestone sites that brings out something else in Riesling, just talking generally about the Westhofen sites? And what do you see in the Nierstein grapes that is different?
Yeah, first of all, again, we have to look on the climate conditions. So Nierstein is situated directly on the Rhine River. It's a little bit warmer as in Westhofen, and this means vegetation is maybe, let's say, 4 to 7 days earlier, and this makes a difference in the way of ripening. And secondly, of course, in these steeper slopes on the red slate soils, water could be more challenging thing because these very intense soils are not preserving water as well as our heavy clayish soils, which makes a difference in summertime. And if you have a look on the aroma profile of the Riesling, which is coming from these differences, I would say you get another kind of flavor. The Rheinfront, Nierstein, Nackenheim comparing to us, and it's very much depending on the vintage in which direction it moves. So in general, you get an earlier ripeness, and therefore you get also a bunch of intense fruit aromatics and flavors on the Rhine River directly on these red slate soils, where we still on a more cooler profile. But in some years it's an advantage, and in other years maybe it could be also too much. So in the warm vintage, I personally prefer our cooler terroir, also in the view of aroma profile. In the cooler vintage, sometimes you see, okay, look, that's the reason why this region is so famous from the past, when climate conditions have been more difficult, but they reach out to get ripe fruit year by year.
And do you see a bit of a difference in the palate weight between Westhofen and the limestone and the red slate of Nierstein?
Sure. But interesting point is that both styles show a good length in the wine, because both wines are coming from a soil with the influence of stone material and with the influence of mineral flavors. So it's not like this, that the one is more short and easier to drink and the other is more intense and richer on the palate. That's not the difference. It's just a different kind of feeling and a different kind of mouth feeling. And the funny point is that every grower has another explanation how it's expressed. So I also hear sometimes that some people directly situated on the Rhine, they tell it's the more elegant wine. I would say our wines are more elegant and a little bit cooler in their texture. So you could discuss, you see. So it's you have to taste.
Well, that's why we love tasting them. I'm going to only very briefly talk about the VDP, the Verband Deutsche Prädikatsweingüter. We don't want to get bogged down in law and rules, but I'm just going to read a little quote because we're moving into terroir territory. The VDP developed an in-house vineyard classification in response to unfortunate consequences of the 1971 German wine law. Among other things, the law made it very difficult to identify which wines truly offer exceptional quality. Just in a relatively concise way, what were those unfortunate consequences?
Yeah, first of all, through the system of the law of 71, we lost orientation what's really the best qualities. It was just a signal to show how ripe the fruits have been, which is shown on the label by the predicate system. So the sugar level of the fruit was one of the most important informations on this idea. And so people talk about these QBA, Kabinett Spätlese, Auslese styles without seeing the tasting profile. So you could produce it in the dry, off-dry, or in a fruity or sweet style, and it sounds same. And the vineyard sites are getting less important because they added a lot of names for sites which go over some different villages altogether. So it mixes out different terroirs with one name. And they also try to have more vineyards into the famous names. So a lot of small, very well-known vineyard site names are blown up into the double size or more with the same name. Through this, you also have lost a little bit the profile and the identity of these very famous sites. So it was maybe too much the idea to bring more wine onto the famous and successful wine history, and this matched not really out quite well. And of course, we have had also a situation that in the 70s and 80s, a lot of sweet wines are produced, which have been successful in the world wine markets in a way, but it's getting more and more, and there are a lot of mass production named same as the top wines, and this was not maybe the best idea. However, in all these years, there are still existing the other growers, mostly smaller family estates, focused on quality all the time. And yeah, some of them struggled through the German wine law classification because they couldn't point out what's very important. And we tried to change this in the VDP in the view that we would like to do a vineyard classification, which expresses best terroirs on the label and gives the importance of terroir back to the wine. So we focused on the top vineyard sites to name. We also have focused in a way on a new dry style, which was existing also before, but was not pointed out in this intense way. And with the first wines from this style, people see that it's a big success producing these higher qualities under lower yields and everything. And so I guess also a lot more wines in this style are existing nowadays because it's a successful idea.
Yeah, so in other words, in a way, distorting the idea of origin and taking away, I suppose, how precious where your wine comes from is, and also distorting the idea of quality as well, or the way that we explain quality and the way that we respect quality production. When it comes to, as you say, small quality growers, who's your favourite grower in the Nahe?
Dönnhoff. Easy. And I would say, even if he wasn't sitting next to me,
I know you would. So on that front, Cornelius, we talked about why the Nahe isn't more famous, and you've given a few reasons. But there is a thing, is there not, with the Nahe, that there are fewer estates that have been operating for a long time with a recognisable record. What's the general history of vineyard ownership? And does that feed into the fact that the domain, the idea of estates in Nahe is a little bit younger in some ways, less recognized?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's tricky, We had in the Nahe a couple of really, really good estates around 100 years, 120 years ago. Say in Bad Kreuznach, Anhäuser, von Plettenberg, Gut Leuthof. Those were like famous estates that really had a vision and really were producing also during those years already terroir-driven wines where their focus was always on single vineyard sites. But over generations, sometimes a generation gets the helm of a winery and maybe is not as talented at something like this. So, it happens that wine quality is not as good anymore. I mean, people come and go, sites stay. The great terroir will be always great terroir. Yeah, so it always depends also a little bit of the people who farm that land. So those big estates, you have to think about 100 years ago, they were sometimes 100 hectares. That is huge, even for today's standards. Yeah, but they really laid the first stone. I don't know.
The foundations.
The foundations, kind of. Yeah, and this is where other winemakers in the Nahe region still participate from. Yeah, but as I said, so sometimes generations come and then maybe they're not as talented, and then they have trouble selling wine, whatever, and then opportunities for other people occur where they can, buy great terroirs, and that is also what happened to our estate and to others as well. So if you think in the Nahe, let's say you have in the upper Nahe, you have like Schönleber in the middle Nahe, maybe us, and then when you go towards the Rhine River, maybe Deal and those estates, we are not that old. I mean, our families make wine since hundreds of years, but we are not that old on the radar of the people because maybe the last generation had this opportunity to buy great vineyard land. Yeah, and from there on it more or less started. Yeah. But on the foundation of those other estates who were there before.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, talking about great sites, I think Moorstein's first mentions as a great terroir for grape growing is the 1200s, sometime way back in time. And I remember, again, Cornelius, your father, showing me an old vineyard map, and he was expressing his amazement at how well people understood where grapes grew beautifully to make beautiful wines years and years ago, and how their intuition and their experience has been borne out over time. So what makes a great site in the Nahe?
Okay, there are many different things you have to look at. So what you were talking before about the wine law 71. So I agree with everything that Philipp said, but I think you missed one point. Totally different climate conditions during that time. And then during that time, you had sites where you couldn't get grapes ripe. It was impossible to get Riesling ripe there. So, and that was, okay, You can't produce like a Spätlese or something there, so it's not a good site, kind of, yeah. And you had other sites where you always get ripe grapes, and that was then through the predicate system, always a Spätlese, kind of. This vineyard is kind of important. Yet the thing is, great sites, it's tricky. So today it's less obvious than it was in the past because with climate conditions. So now it's not a problem to get even in not so good sites ripe grapes. Yeah. So that part maybe did fall under the table now, but still what didn't fall under the table is the type of flavor. Yeah. How does the wine taste? How does it feel? And that needs generations to figure out. Yeah. Yep. So because there will always be a vintage sometime where all the sites perform perfect. But great sites will perform also very good in shitty vintages. Yeah, and that makes the difference. It will always develop nice flavors and have this kind of energy in the wine also in vintages that are not 100% perfect. And that takes time to figure out.
I would like to add that it's also a question of personality. So a great site brings always wines which are unique and have their own personality, and you could identify this personality in every vintage.
Despite the grower. That is the point. Despite the grower, despite the people who farm that land, because the personality of the land is more important than the people who farm it.
Yeah. That's a very nice point. And when people look at your sources, I suppose, your vineyards, they see village names such as Schloss Bockelheim, Niederhausen, Oberhausen, Hochsheim, and others. How far are all those villages from each other?
So we are located in Oberhausen, yeah. Then Schloss Böckelheim, Niederhausen, and Norheim and Oberhausen. This is in a radius of 3 kilometers. Yeah. So everything close together. A little bit further away is then Roxheim, which is in the side valley, but this is also, as the crow flies, maybe 6 kilometers away. So it's still very close, but completely different climate conditions. And then the furthest vineyards we are farming are in Bad Kreuznach. This is maybe like 10, 11 kilometers. So it's actually very close together. Yeah, so easy.
We'll talk about soils, though, when we talk about the sites, because that's another interesting point. Going back to Westhofen, Wittmann family, I think on your label, site 1663. So what is the history of grape growing in the Wittmann family, and also the more recent history of your father Gunther passing the estate on to you?
So first 1663, of course, it's just a number in a way, but it was the first date where it was written down in the old books that we are wine farmers in Westhofen. So this just means that our family is on this place for a long time, and I'm now the 11th generation, which sounds a little bit crazy, but it is like it is. And it is nothing extra special. It's also not really unusual in our region that people are standing on their place and working there. Most important for me is how we have developed over the last 70 years maybe. So after Second World War, the estate was splitted because there were 2 daughters, and everyone got 50% of the estate. And then my grandfather came to Westhofen. He was from Württemberg, and he was one of the first students of the wine school in Weinsberg, and was very well taught there. And he taken over running the estate end of the 40s, and he brought us back on the same sites in, I guess, 20 years and developed the estate in a very good way. My father followed in the 70s, and he was very excited about great terroir and about great wine. So he also developed quality intensely and brought me in a situation that it was easy to follow, because the estate was well built. Identification of quality was clarified, and also the Moorstein Riesling was our flagship in my father's time too. And so I just followed, and I have maybe also changed some things, but I'm only the follower of my father's work. Maybe nowadays in a little bit other climate conditions, and I just would say. It's the piece of land where we work makes it special.
Yes, and you're also organic from quite a long way back at the estate. Yeah. And you were pretty young when you started working there. I mean, you're young now, so you were very young then. Yeah. And I've seen you in the vineyards bouncing around, looking very happy among your actually very nicely manicured plants. Tell us a little bit now, I think, is a good time, about those Grand Cru sites that you have.
Yeah, sure. So maybe I would start with sites from Westhofen, from the village of Westhofen. So there are 4 very important sites. It's Aulerde, which is the warmest part where you have the best climate conditions, and we always get very yellow fruit-driven Rieslings in a little bit richer style, a little bit comparing to the Pfalz region. Then we do have the neighbor side of Aulerde, which is totally different in taste. It's a Kirschspiel. You get much more spiciness in the wines. So it's an east-faced side, open to the Rhine Valley. And so you do have the early morning sun there, but in the evening, sun is leaving earlier. And the nights are cooler through this. So it's really, in its fruit texture, it's more on these white pepper, mint, spicy aromatics. Very unique. And there is just a little bit of clayish topsoil. And after 50 centimeters, the rocks are coming. So it means a very intense soil, and you could also feel this in the length of the wine. Then we have the 2 sites, Brunnenhuis and Moorstein, which are situated on higher altitude. So it's the Rhine Valley. Westhofen is on 100 meters. Aulerde is maybe 120 to 150 meters. Kirschspiel 150, 160 meters. And then Brunnenhuis and Moorstein, we talk about 180 to 240 meters. And this makes a difference in the Rhine Valley. So it's closely a week of vegetation difference between these 2 sites comparing to the others. So a little bit a different aroma profile through this. So a little bit longer hanging times of the fruit, so more complexity fruit-wise. And here we do have very heavy clayish soils and big rocks in the underground. And this gives a great texture to the wine and a great length. And the difference between Brunnenhuis and Moorstein is that in Brunnenhuis, the soil is colored red, so there's a lot of iron in the soil, so a kind of terra rossa soil. And for me, I would describe it like this, that these Brunnenhuis wines always have a little bit more creaminess in the middle palate, comparing to the Moorstein, which is more, not to say it negative, it's more lean, it's more straight, it's more pure. And for me, Moorstein Riesling is expressing itself like a kind of spring water and crystal clear in its aromatics. Yeah, and then to the Höllenbrand, don't forget. So it's our newest große Lage. It's situated in the neighbor village of Gundersheim, also on the same altitude as Moorstein. So a cool site, a little bit more open for the west wind. So 100% south faced. If you hear the name Höllenbrand, it sounds quite hot, but it's the coolest site comparing to the others, right, which gives a profile which is usually more existing on the northern regions.
Yeah, right, very good. Cornelius, you said your family has been growing grapes for a long time, but the estate hasn't been around for as long as a name under Dönnhoff. Just tell us about the beginning of the estate, because you're the 4th generation effectively now.
Yeah, you can see it that way. So the thing is, our family came to our area as miners originally. Yeah, so our area is very well known for all kind of minerals. So there's a mercury mine actually in the Lemberg, which is one of the biggest mountains in our area. And then you might know the name Kupfergrube, so famous vineyard name in our area, Kapper mine. Yeah, so the name comes from it because it's a Kapper mine, or was a former Kapper mine. So the family came here for mining, and then I guess they discovered that you could also grow grapes here. Yeah, and so similar to Philipp, we have an old family Bible. People wrote down certain things that happened during some years, like important things, I don't know, daughter got born, stuff like this. And the oldest mention that we're having, the oldest record with wine growing was from 1751, where some of the former generations wrote down that this was a very, very good year for growing wine. But during that time, it was not a winery. Yeah, it was more like a traditional German farm. So we were growing some wine, but we also had farmed different land, growing different crops basically for feeding the family, and had also some animals and stuff like this. And this went on a couple of years. And then basically around 1880, the focus shifted a little bit. So it got a little bit more into that wine growing. And then also around 1920, we were one of the first who started bottling their own wine and selling it in bottles in the Nahe. That was quite early. Before that, when you were doing or growing wine, you basically sold the wine with the barrel. Yeah, and it then got shipped down the river into the Rhine, and from there it went to merchants, and basically they bottled it under whatever kind of name, I guess maybe Rhine wine, yeah. Yeah, so 1920 they started then bottling their own wines, and then my grandfather took over. It went on, but still was more like a farm. And then when my father started his apprenticeship 1966, he went to the winery school in Bad Kreuznach, finished that, and his focus was always, I don't want to be like a farmer, I want to be a winemaker kind of thing, yeah. After that, he went also as one of the first students to Geisenheim, which he did, and my grandparents didn't know that. So because he wasn't allowed to go to Geisenheim because he was needed as a worker, So basically what he did, in the morning he went to Geisenheim to study, in the afternoon and in the late evenings he went to the vineyards and finished his work. And it took some time until my grandparents figured that out. Yeah? And then when he was finished, they were like, okay, now we have studied. My grandfather basically wrote over the whole business directly to him. That was 1971, where he had around 4.5 hectares. Tiny, but good parcels. Oberhäuser Leistenberg, tiny bit of Hermannshöhle, and of course Oberhäuser Brücke, our monopole. That were our vineyard sites. And then came a time where, as I said, so from Anhäuser, Plettenberg, from Pirot, some generations, mismanagement, and he had the opportunity to buy great vineyard sites over the time. Yeah, and then when I joined him in the 2000s, basically we were having around 15 hectares, yeah. And then came another time where I had the opportunity to buy great vineyard land again, yeah. And today we are farming, 32 hectares more or less, and no farmland, no animals. So everything of this stuff. My father has a sister, so he gave the farmland and all this other stuff went to my sister. So he was taking over the wine business. His sister was taking over like more the farmlands and stuff like this.
Yes, your father, Helmut, as you say, made a very big difference to that estate that's carried on to this day. You mentioned yesterday that he's showing up in the winery a bit more again now because he obviously can't stay away because he loves it so much. But when we talk about the sites, I'm very aware actually with both of you that of course climate is such an important thing. We talk about soils a lot being the differentiating factor, but of course the Nahe is a windy river. You've got different expositions, you've got different parts of the slopes, and some of them are pretty steep. But in terms of soil, you've got quite a lot of different types that you're growing grapes on. How do you see those sites, and just name the sites as well, in terms of their soils and how they translate into wines?
Okay, so then let's start towards Bad Kreuznach. So from we're moving then up the Nahe region from Bad Kreuznach. So in Bad Kreuznach I have two sites, Kahlenberg and Grötenfuhl. Those sites are a little bit more loamy driven with a lot of pebbles and quartzite stones, much warmer sites. Kahlenberg is perfect for dry wines. Off dry wines don't work there because acidity is always a little bit too low. So perfect for dry wines, off dry wines don't work there. Grötenfuhl is not far away, completely different. Grötenfuhl is steep and we have a plateau on top. On the plateau on top, perfect for off dry wines because we have a little bit higher acidity, and the steep slopes, perfect for dry wines again. Then we move on, then we come to Roxheim. Roxheim is unique. Roxheim is a little bit like Nierstein. Yeah, we have also this red soil, red sandstone soil. It's the only vineyard site in the whole Nahe area where we have this soil type. The wines there are quite unique in our portfolio because they're a little bit more herbal. That's very, very typical for them. It's also very steep south-facing side. And then we go into the Nahe Valley, and then we come out in Norheim. In Norheim I have two sites, Norheimer Kirchheck, where we only make one sweet wine, only a Spätlese. We have here slate soils, yeah, and the slate we get this kind of like salty tasting acidity. It's pretty nice to balance off the sweetness. It's actually one of the oldest sites in the whole Nahe region, or where we know of, because the name got mentioned, I think 800 after Christ, something like that. Wow. So it's quite old. And then the neighbor side of Kirchheck is then Delchen, completely different. Off-dry wines don't work there, only in certain vintages where we have extremely high acidity levels. It's 100% for dry Rieslings. Soil type is a mixture of slate on top, and underneath we have volcanic soils. Absolutely beautiful, very hard to farm, a lot of terraces. Yeah, but one of the really, really good Grand Cru sites in the Nahe region. And then we move up from Norheim to Niederhausen. In Niederhausen we have Klamm, which is also a very, very good site. We have Klamm a little bit more at the bottom of the valley where it's a little bit cooler. So once again, perfect for off-dry wines. So as you can see, in our opinion, every site has a special talent for one type of wine. Maybe some sites are more talented. We can do maybe two types, dry style, off dry. And it takes a lot of time to figure that out, what you can do best, or where the sites show its terroir the best, I must say. Yeah. And so Klamm, slate soil, once again, off dry, perfect for Cabernet, because we achieve there always a high physiological ripeness without a high sugar ripeness. Yeah. And then you move just around the corner to Hermannshöhle. Yeah, Hermannshöhle is just, the flagship. It's I just bluntly say it's the best vineyard in the whole Nahe region. That
by far.
By far, yeah, kind of.
I thought you were going to say Germany.
No, I wouldn't say that, because, every region has his own flagship vineyard, I must say. It's in Rheinhessen. For me, it's Moorstein, because it's so distinctive, despite the grower. But for me, still, Philipp is the Moorstein grower, to get the terroir out of the best, And the same is with Hermannshöhle. No matter who is farming it, it's always the best wine.
And it has that talent of showing terroir across a lot of those different styles.
And I have to add, if you walk through, you see it. It's the site is showing that it's the king of the valley. You see the soil, it's impressive.
Yeah, it is this like gray slate, but we also have some limestone underneath. That's very unusual. You have those two soil components together. And then the vineyard itself is a little bit like cone-shaped. So the sun wanders around it. So you have a southeast side, pure south side, and southwest side. So that means basically on southeast and southwest, where it's a little bit cooler. So in one side we have the morning sun, and the other one we have more the evening sun. But during midday it's not as hot. It's perfect for off-dry wines again because acidity is a little bit higher. And in the middle part, in the center, which is 100% south-facing, that is the spot for dry wines. And then just below Hermannshülle's Brücke, so Brücke, our monopole, one of our oldest vineyards. Also, my great-grandfather was responsible for buying this land, and planting vineyards there. So at the bottom of the valley, completely different climate conditions. It doesn't get so hot during the day because it's not a steep slope. And during the night, it's much cooler because all the air from the surrounding mountains flows in there. So it means extremely long ripening phase, but very tricky to grow grapes because close to the river. So we have always high humidity, problematic of botrytis, which is good in some point for like Auslese, Beerenauslese wines, but for dry wines, very tricky. So that's also why we make only a little bit of dry wine there. Then in Oberhausen, we have Leistenberg, southeast facing, extremely steep, very cool because we get some cool winds flowing down that side valley. Perfect again for cabinets. Southeast facing means we get the early morning sun. During midday, the sun is already behind that mountain, and that basically leads to that similar thing that happens in Clam, high physiological ripeness without high sugar ripeness. Exactly what we want for cabinet. And then Schloss Böckelheim, Felsenberg. It's maybe, when you look at that vineyard, our most dramatic vineyard. Super steep, no topsoil, 100% volcanic soils, so porphyry and Möllerfür stones. Perfect for dry wines. Off-dry, similar to the Delchin, only works in certain vintages. Reason is because it's so stony soil, so those stones store the heat from the day and radiate it off during the night. So acidity is always a little bit lower. In terms of wines, very strict, not floral. It's a kind of, I don't know if you still can say that, but for me it's a very masculine type of wine. Very hard. You need time to understand it, and also you need time in the bottle to develop his full potential. I hope I didn't forget one, but that should be all of them.
Yeah, and gives such a picture of the diversity of those sites, as you say, and the different talents that they have, as you put it.
What Philipp just said, that you can see it. In our area, it's maybe a little bit easier to see because, we have the steep slopes, river turns. When I go to Philipp, you need way more experience to understand why this Moorstein is different from Aulerde and Kirchspiel, because for the, let's say, untrained eye, it's a little bit harder to see why it is. You have to look way more into details, and in our area, maybe the details are a little bit more obvious.
Yeah, and when it comes to Philipp's wines, obviously you've both paid each other compliments anyway. You've obviously tasted each other's wines at all kinds of events all over the world, and even this week you're spending a lot of time together. What do you see as, I guess, the signatures of a Wittmann wine?
Oh, that's tricky. Okay, because I think
I found one.
Yeah. I think as a winemaker, you always look differently as wines because sometimes, it's very hard to just enjoy it. Sometimes you just try to pick it in your head and try to think about all the different components and how they work together.
What's going on?
Yeah, and Philipp's wines are complex. And I must say that is every year, from the basic estate Riesling to Grand Cru's, basically. They're very, very complex and very individual and very approachable. But on the other hand, not easy. I mean, they're easy to drink. They're very easy to drink, I think, because they're so good, but it's not easy wines. You can go way into detail with those wines, and I think that makes them so special.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about site, which is the right thing to do, and climates of the regions where you're operating. But Philipp, it's kind of an annoying question, but I'd like to ask it anyway for our listeners, which is, you've got that wonderful grape material, you've got organic farming, you've got a lot of attention to detail out there in the vineyard, and obviously the sites that you know very well, as Cornelius says, with the experience of understanding them. But how do you see the things that you have to do to get those grapes into a bottle the best way, i.e. in the cellar? How do you make Riesling to not get in the way of that expression?
I think it's the same situation for all the winemakers who try to pronounce the origin best possible way. You have to know your vineyards, and you have to follow the vegetation to understand the vintage. And when the fruits are getting ripe, you have to taste the fruits day by day. You have to follow the vegetation, what's going on. You have to see the weather forecast, and you have to take the right decisions when to pick and how to select. And then, of course, it's a question how to handle the fruits, bring into the press, how to clear the juice, how to ferment. Question of how to store, which do you choose, stainless steel or big wooden casks, for example. Question of least contact time, racking or not, filtering or not, and when to bottle. It's easy on the one side. On the other side, I think you need passion for it. And so you can't write it down. You have to do it like this, and then it's working. And each place is different. So I'm sure that if you would send me to Cornelius' place, I would need a time to understand what to do. For example, when I started working in Nierstein with these 2 sites for our Nierstein Riesling, I needed around 5 years to understand how to handle Nierstein in the way that it should be expressed, in my opinion. And of course, you could also have another opinion as another one. So it's always a little bit, it's also the fingerprint of the grower you could find in the wine. So I'm sure that a Dönnhoff Westhofen Riesling, which is existing, funnily, from last year, is always impressing also very much the DNA of a Dönnhoff Riesling, even if it's also a taste of Westhofen terroir, you know? So it's something very individual and very personal at the end.
And the same question that I asked Cornelius then for you, what do you see as being the Dönnhoff way?
It's the most elegant wines I know from Germany in these styles, and Cornelius figured out to produce dry style Riesling with a lot of texture, with a lot of density and vibration, and amazing mineral driven characteristic. He get it to have ripeness on the one hand and the extremely elegant on the other side. These off-dryer styles, it's so dancing and elegant and ripened that it's quite special. So I would say it's about elegance. If you talk about Dönnhoff, it's elegance.
Okay, so Cornelius, obviously we've talked about Philipp's focus on dry wines over in Westhofen. You obviously make lots of different predicat wines. Just what kind of skill does it take in terms of judgment in picking at the right time, but also, I suppose, stopping the fermentation at the right time for Cabernet Spätlese? It's obviously a lot of experience. There must be a lot of instinct. There must be a bit of tasting with your father that's come into that. What do you see as the necessary skills of observation and judgment?
I mean, as Philipp just said, the most important thing is, I guess, experience, yeah? And there, as you said, I have still my father around, and I can't ask him questions. Maybe was there a vintage that was similar to this growing season? What did you do? Did it work out? Yes or no? So there it starts. On the other hand, you need that talent of a vineyard where we spoke before, yeah? Not in every vineyard we can do it because acidity levels might not be right. Maybe also the flavor itself that the vineyard produced doesn't work in off-dry wines. That can happen as well. For example, Roxheim is such a vineyard. Roxheim is not perfect for off-dry wines. We have the acidity there, but the flavor profile is not, for me, you not find the balance, yeah? And then at the end, it's lots of tasting, yeah? Tasting the grapes, as Philipp said, to find this right harvest day, yeah? And then in the cellar, it's the same. During fermentation, you have to taste the wine constantly, sometimes every couple of hours, to find that right spot where you have to stop it. Sometimes, also my wife and so sometimes they think they're crazy because during harvest I set my alarm clock at 2 o'clock during the night just to go and taste one barrel, to see if now is the time or maybe 2 hours later to stop a ferment. And sometimes it is that important, sometimes you say, maybe another 2-3 hours, maybe there's like 1-2 grams of sugar, it's still too much. Yeah. So it comes to a lot of like details, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that's precision. I remember you saying, actually, I think when I was over there about Spätlese tasting, that you feel like sometimes you're tasting through a haze. Yeah. And you kind of have to try and see through it to what's...
Yeah, because So there's so much yeast in the wine, so you don't see actually... In the beginning, I couldn't do it. So I was... My father really... He said something, I was like, no, I don't agree, because I couldn't see it. And then afterwards, when the wine cleared, I could see what he meant. So that takes so much experience to try to make that decision in that baby kind of phase that the wines are in, yeah? And it's like opening a curtain at some point, and you have to look behind that curtain to make up your mind and to make the right decision, because you only have one. Yeah. You have one chance to do that. Yeah. So if you stop it too early, then it's like just sticky sweet. If you stop it too late, you don't have the balance. Then maybe acidity is too harsh. So you need to nail it. Yeah.
So I prefer to sleep night-wise, so therefore I produce dry wines.
Yeah. Well, and not only that, you married someone who makes the sweet ones.
Yeah, right. She has to wake up to find the right date, not me.
Well, that's right. I want to actually speak about Eva Kluserath now, your wife, Ansgar Kluserath, in Trittenheim in the Mosel. When did you guys get married?
In 2007, so a long time ago. But we are still young, as you already remember.
Of course, very young. Where did you meet?
Geisenheim, so where we have studied, and it was not a plan to marry a girl from the Mosel Valley, and I was 100% sure that my wife won't be in the wine business, but it just happened, It was this beautiful girl, and she's still, and so, there was no choice. It was like it was, and it's really great to see her work at the Mosel Valley, which is completely different, and the way she do it, and it's really splitted business. It's her thing, and I do my thing. Of course, we have a lot of exchange and we taste together, but the growing and the winemaking at Mosel, it's 100% by Eva, and so it's really a unique thing from her.
Yeah, she does make dry wines, but obviously through the Cabernet Spätlese, Auslese, Predicats as well. Have you learned anything from her knowledge, but also from being around the way she observes her Predicat wines and the terroir of Trittenheim and surrounding villages?
You can't compare things. That's the main thing I have learned when I started tasting fruits in Trittenheim before harvest, and the taste is so different, and solutions are sometimes also others at our place. So it's another region, and sometimes it feels like it's another variety. So of course there are some similarities, and if there's a question about styles and things where you could discuss, but growing Riesling in these steep slopes at the Mosel is something extra special and unique, and maybe Cornelius is much closer on than me.
Yeah, back to you, Cornelius, then, talking about different sites. In 24, you had a bit of a shocker with frost, to say the least. The worst frost, I think you said, in your father's experience and yours. So that was obviously devastating to you, but there was at least some friends who kind of came to your rescue in that front. How did that come to be? You're working out other vineyard sources, and was that a pretty special thing as well, to be able to make up some of your losses with some wines from friends?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the lucky position that I guess some people like me. I don't know. So so we had this frost experience. I mean, we always have frost, always had and will always have. The difference is now that through climate change, bud burst is so early that when we have this frost occasions, the buds are already open, or we have tiny little shoots, and then obviously they die. So in April in 24, we had this massive frost where we hit like -7 degrees in some spots, and not only at the bottom of the valley, it went up to all the top to 300 meters high. So we had like really, really big losses. And of course, as winemakers, you are in exchange with your friends, and I was in exchange with Philipp all the time. He called me. I asked him how it was in Westhofen. He said, yeah, we were lucky. Yeah. And then he asked me how it was in Oberhausen, and said, yeah, we were not so lucky. And so over time, then you realize, okay, that is a tricky situation, because at some point you need also a little bit something to sell. And then this idea arose that getting grapes from other growers, like also in our area, to help out with like estate Rieslings, stuff like this. And then this idea came into our mind, wouldn't it be nice to have something from a different region? Yeah, to add something, because some of our single vineyard sites, we didn't harvest anything. So to add something to the portfolio to make it more interesting. And to be honest, I can't really 100% recall how it happened, but then somehow Philipp offered me some grapes from Westhofen to make a village wine. And we talked about this a little bit, and then my friend Nicola Libelli from Bürglin Wolf basically heard of it, and they offered me grapes from Wachenheim. And for me, that was amazing, getting grapes from two different regions, make village wines out of those regions. And so this little project started. But I told them, I don't want to interfere with your growing season. I don't care. Do whatever you want. You know your vineyards the best. I don't want to give you any tips. I don't want anything. Just do your thing. And then when we think harvest times comes, we come with our team, harvest it. And then from there on, it's my responsibility. And it worked out beautifully. So first we had to go to Pfalz. They called me. They think it's ripe. Do you want to come and take a look? And then I drove down there, and it was okay, perfect, yeah. And then the next day, basically, all our team went to Pfalz, harvested it, brought the grapes back to Oberhausen, and then we vinified it basically as it would be like a side from us. And the same we did with Philipp. So Philipp was a little bit later than Pfalz, because obviously Pfalz warmer, then Rheinhessen, and then Oberhausen, yeah. So was quite nice. And then we went to Philipp also with our whole team, harvested the grapes there in one day, drove it back to Oberhausen, and then processed it like I process all my other wines. And from the beginning there was this question, what was very interesting for all of us, if it was Philipp or Bürglin Wolf or me, what do you see more? Is it the handwriting of us, of the estate of Dönnhoff, of how we do things, or is it the terroir? Yeah, it was really, really interesting to see. Yeah,
I bet. You mentioned climate change, that budburst coming forward. We tasted an unbelievably good 2005 Felsenberg Spätlese, which is not nowadays seen as the regular talent of that vineyard, perhaps a little bit climate-wise. What are you doing, Philip? Or how have you seen a climate change and how are you adapting to it?
Yeah, of course, first to say, of course, there is a climate change, no question. We do see it year by year, and it could pronounce in very different ways. So in some years, it's still like this, that we have to look to get ripe fruit at the end of the vegetation, and maybe we have a rainy season or more rain as expected, or things like these shitty frost things happen, however. So that's one point. And the other point, you have these more warmer vintage, earlier vegetation, hot and dry summers, and of course in this case the vineyard system should be adapted on it. And so we have to find out how to balance our growing in best possible way, and soil management, it's getting more and more important to have these perfect balance of the growing, that plants come through even if it's wet or if it's hot and dry. So this is an important point, so the way to manage and to drain the soils. And another point is canopy management, which is also very important. My first impressions about how to handle hot summers have been here in Australia when I visited Western Australia in 2004 and Clare Valley 2006. The question to shadow the fruits with leaf is something we do also in summer times nowadays. In the old days, we cut all the leaf to have enough sun on the fruits, you know. So these things in a way changed. And also yield management is another thing. But what also could happen nowadays is you expect again, an early year and a warm season, and then it's the opposite. And then you have to handle in the right way before it's too late, but otherwise you get unripe fruits. So sometimes it's like a poker game, but it's quite interesting, and it's always a help to be close on your vineyards. You have to see what happens outside.
Yeah, absolutely, and you both are. Just the last couple of questions. Cornelius, obviously you're out here in Australia talking about wine. You've been in Japan before, heading back through Singapore all the way back to Germany. What is it like communicating German wine? In your experience, you know, you've been at the estate for a long time doing this now. Has the perception of German wine changed? And how informed do you think people are about the kinds of wines and what's important to you?
That's a little bit tricky. I mean, it depends a little bit where you go. And in the end, you know, when people trust their own tongue and just trust what's in their glass and you know, enjoy this, then my job is done, kind of. On the other hand, you know, people get more educated. People do want to know more, do want to go more into details. I mean, German wine is complicated. We're talking about Riesling. I make in my estate 24 different ones out of one grape variety, and all of them taste completely different. German wine labels especially can be complicated. We have the predicate system, we have the system of the VDP, which is kind of next to each other. And that can scare people away, basically, because they don't really know. So it's still a lot of explaining to do. We try to do that. If you understand it, in my opinion, it's very logical. But it's hard to understand because it's one grape variety and you can get so many things. And if you want to get a Chardonnay, it will be always dry. Yeah, it's easy to understand. Yeah, and then if you don't know how good the quality level is, I guess you go look at the price and then it gets very obvious, very simple. Yeah,
sometimes,
yeah. And with Riesling, it's not that simple. So you need more education to, I guess, understand it. But in the end, the most important thing is, you know, that people, that they are not scared, that they are open-minded and try it and then make up their own mind. Do I like this type of wine or not? Yeah, I'm not mad at anybody if you don't like it. Yeah, everybody has his own taste. It's like with music, with art, with all those things in life that nobody really needs, but it's nice to have. And there, everybody chooses their own favorite, kind of.
Yeah, and Philip, it's sort of a similar question, but a bit different. How do you feel in your role, I guess, when you travel overseas as an ambassador for Westhofen, for Riesling, for Germany, for wine? Is it something that you enjoy doing?
Yes, definitely, because there are luckily a lot of people around the world who are interested in this, and this is a great story that if we look back over the last 15, 20 years, there was a great development quality-wise for sure in Germany, but there's also, nowadays we do really have a base of Riesling lovers in the whole world who are celebrating the variety and who are celebrating the quality of the wines, and therefore it's a pleasure to travel and to show our wines, even if German wine could be complicated on labels and because of the different styles. We are also living in a time where people have a great knowledge about these wines, and especially these dry style Rieslings, which have been compared to the other great wines of the world are still quite interesting price-wise. And this is always a very good argument for bringing people into Riesling, because if you are a Burgundy lover and drink a lot of Chardonnay and you taste the Rieslings from Germany with all this vibrant minerality, people easily could understand that this is also something special.
Yeah, I have to jump in here because, in the last 2 months ago, something happened that was impossible maybe 20 years ago. So our estates got visited by one of the best estates from Champagne, Burgundy, and Bordeaux, because of their interest in the wine. That would have never happened 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And you see how much of an impact what we are doing over the last 20, 30 years had in the world wine business. When they asked to visit our estate, I showed that email my father, and my father was like, that was everything he has ever dreamed about, that he gets recognized from those great estates. And today we are at a point that we are in that same league, and that has happened over the last maybe 20, 25 years. So it's a very new thing for us.
And it's very cool. Okay, last question. Quite recently on the podcast, I spoke to Jason Letts from the Eyrie Vineyards in Oregon. And he was talking about his parents when they first planted the vineyard, how people would come and see them in Oregon, first Pinot Noir grapevines going in there. And he would get the impression from hearing all these different accents and different languages being spoken around the family estate from people who'd come to visit, that what his parents were doing was important. And it struck me as quite an interesting word to use. But in a world today, why do you think, Philipp, that wine has an important role for humanity?
It's something cultural, and wine brings people together in a way. If you have a glass of wine and you taste, you can come easily into communication. And in our world, communication is the most important thing for exchange of the people from different countries, from different places and different characteristics. And so wine and food, great to share and to communicate about.
And Cornelius, anything to add?
Not really, but I think that is really the point, especially in a time where you can get everything, digitally kind of, but what you can't get is this feeling when you enjoy something together, if it's just wine, music, art or food, whatever, but it belongs there. And this is why I think wine is and will be very important to make life a little bit more enjoyable.
Absolutely. And you get to hang out with your friends, like you two
definitely.
Together over in Australia, having a nice holiday together. Working holiday.
Yeah, it's not a holiday, come on.
That's it for this week's edition of Vininspo Alternative Format. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make your feelings known loud and clear on the social media and podcast platforms where you came across it. Huge thanks again to my guests, Philipp Wittmann and Cornelius Dönnhoff, and to their Aussie importer CellarHand for allowing this to happen. Subscribe to Vininspo to have next week's episode with super switched on global wine journalist Felicity Carter land directly in your inbox. But for now, live wine to the fullest. Cheers!